What if the reason your life refuses to change is not lack of opportunity, but your addiction to inconsistency? You say you want power, respect, control, but your actions expose something weaker. You start, then disappear. You promise, then delay. You speak, then contradict yourself. And people see it. Even when they don't say it, they feel it. In your voice, your posture, your presence. There is no weight behind you, no certainty, no discipline, just scattered energy pretending to be ambition. If you understand this kind of truth, the uncomfortable kind, then you're not like most people watching. Subscribe, not because you need motivation, but because you're building an identity that doesn't tolerate weakness. Because this is where excuses come to die. You think consistency is boring. That's your first mistake. You've been trained to chase intensity, not stability. You wait for motivation like it's a signal, but motivation is unreliable. It's emotional, and emotion is unstable. Stoics understood something you keep ignoring. Control is everything. Not control over others, control over yourself. And you don't have it. Not yet, because if you did, your habits wouldn't collapse under pressure. You wouldn't negotiate with discomfort. You wouldn't disappear when things get hard. You would remain unmoved, unshaken, consistent. That's the first shift. Consistency is not repetition. It is identity. It is who you are when nobody is watching. It is what you do when there is no reward, no applause, no validation, just silence. And in that silence, most people fall apart. Because they need noise to feel alive. You don't need noise. You need structure. You need discipline so sharp it cuts through your excuses before they even form. You say you're tired. But tired of what? You haven't even pushed yourself to the edge. You've only tasted effort, then retreated. That's not exhaustion. That's avoidance. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, not to impress others, but to correct his own mind. He didn't wait to feel ready. He acted because it was necessary. You don't act. You hesitate. You overthink. You delay. And every delay weakens your identity. Every broken promise to yourself is a vote for the weaker version of you. Read that again, because that's your reality. You are not becoming stronger. You are reinforcing weakness, quietly, daily. And the worst part? You've learned how to justify it. You call it rest. You call it timing. You call it waiting for the right moment. There is no right moment. There is only action or avoidance. That's the second shift. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your systems. And your system is broken because it depends on how you feel. Feelings don't build empires. Discipline does. Cold, unemotional, precise. You want to become magnetic? Then stop being predictable in your weakness. Start being predictable in your discipline. Do the work, even when it feels meaningless. Especially when it feels meaningless. Because that's where identity is forged. Not in excitement, but in repetition. Painful, boring, necessary repetition. You avoid that. That's why you stay average. You chase results, but avoid process. You want the outcome, but reject the method. That contradiction is destroying you, slowly, and you feel it. That quiet frustration when nothing changes. That internal voice that whispers, you're capable of more, but you silence it. With distractions, with comfort, with lies. Let's be honest. You don't lack potential. You lack structure. You lack standards. And most importantly, you lack self-respect. Because someone who respects themselves does not break promises to themselves. They don't negotiate with laziness. They don't tolerate inconsistency. They act, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. That's the third shift. Pain is not your enemy. It's your filter. It separates who you say you are from who you actually are. And right now, that gap is wide. Too wide. You speak like someone disciplined, but you act like someone distracted. That contradiction is visible. People may not call you out, but they don't take you seriously, because consistency builds trust. Not words, not intentions, not potential. Execution, daily execution. That's what creates presence. That's what creates authority. That's what makes people feel you before you even speak. But you want shortcuts. There are none. You want results without suffering. That's delusion. Suffering is required. Not dramatic suffering. Not loud struggle. Quiet suffering. The kind nobody sees. Waking up when you don't want to. Working when you're tired. Staying focused when distractions call your name. That's where you're losing. Not in big moments. In small ones. Repeated daily. That's the fourth shift. Your life is not shaped by intensity. It is shaped by repetition. What you do daily defines you permanently. So ask yourself, what are you repeating? Discipline or excuses? Because both compound, both grow, both define you. And right now, your patterns are exposing you. You start strong, then fade. You commit, then disappear. You push, then collapse. That cycle is killing your potential. And deep down, you know it. So stop pretending you don't. Stop blaming external factors. Stop waiting for clarity. Clarity comes from action, not thought. You think too much and act too little. That imbalance is why you feel stuck. You're trapped in your own mind, overanalyzing instead of executing, planning instead of doing, dreaming instead of becoming. That ends now, because if it doesn't, nothing changes. Not your results, not your identity, not your future. You remain exactly where you are, frustrated, capable, but inactive, aware, but undisciplined. That's a dangerous place to live, because awareness without action becomes self-torture. You see what needs to be done, but refuse to do it. That conflict destroys confidence. Slowly, silently, until you stop believing in yourself entirely. And then, you settle. You lower your standards. You accept less. You become average permanently, unless you interrupt the pattern. Right now, not tomorrow, not next week. Now, because consistency doesn't start later. It starts in this moment, with one decision: to act without negotiation, to move without hesitation, to execute without emotion. That's the fifth shift. You don't need more information. You need more action. You already know what to do. You just don't do it. And that's the truth you keep avoiding. So here's what happens next. You either continue this cycle, or you break it completely. No half measures. No temporary discipline. No short bursts of motivation. Permanent change. Identity-level transformation, where consistency is not something you try, it's something you are. And if that sounds extreme, good, because average people fear extremes. Disciplined people live in them. Now look at your life. Not the version you show people. The real version. The private one. Where your habits expose you. Where your discipline is tested. Where your excuses live. That's your truth. And you can't escape it. But you can change it. If you're willing to suffer differently. If you're willing to give up comfort. If you're willing to become someone you've never been. So I'll ask you something simple, and I want you to answer it honestly. Not out loud, but internally. Comment control if you feel this shift happening inside you. Because this is where it begins. Not with motivation, not with hype, but with truth. Uncomfortable, direct, unavoidable truth. Now the question is, will you act on it or ignore it like you always have? Because the next move you make is not just an action. It's a decision about who you are becoming. And if you choose wrong again, you already know where it leads. So choose carefully. And more importantly, act immediately. Because discipline delayed is discipline denied. And you don't need another denial. You need transformation. Now move. Not when it feels right. Not when you're inspired. Move while everything inside you resists. Because that resistance, that's the doorway. You've been turning away from it your entire life. That's why nothing has changed. You avoid discomfort like it's danger. But it's not danger. It's direction. Every time you hesitate, you reinforce weakness. Every time you act, you rewrite identity. And right now, your identity is fragile, built on intentions, not proof. You say you're disciplined, but your habits disagree. You say you're focused, but your actions scatter. You say you want more, but your behavior chooses less. That contradiction is your prison, and you built it, brick by brick, excuse by excuse, delay by delay. No one trapped you. You did, which means you're also the only one who can break out. That realization should hit you hard, because it removes every excuse you've been hiding behind. No one is coming. No one is saving you. No one cares enough to fix your life for you. And that's not harsh. That's reality. The sooner you accept it, the faster you become dangerous. Because now, everything depends on you. Your discipline, your decisions, your standards. And standards, that's where you've been failing quietly. You tolerate things you shouldn't. You accept behavior from yourself that you would never respect in others. You let yourself slide. You let things go. You give yourself permission to be average. And then you wonder why nothing improves. Standards define everything. What you allow continues. What you tolerate grows. What you excuse becomes your identity. So ask yourself, what have you been tolerating? Late starts? Broken promises? Weak focus? Inconsistent effort? That's your answer. That's your problem. And until you raise your standards, nothing changes. Not your habits. Not your results. Not your life. You don't need a new strategy. You need stricter rules. Non-negotiable rules. Rules that don't bend based on your mood. Rules that don't disappear when things get hard. Rules that define you. Because discipline without rules is just wishful thinking. You wake up and decide based on how you feel. That's not discipline. That's chaos. Controlled chaos, maybe, but still chaos. And chaos produces inconsistent results. You don't need more options. You need fewer. Fewer decisions. Fewer excuses. Fewer ways out. That's how you build consistency. By removing the exits. You've given yourself too many escape routes. Too many, I'll do it later. Too many, just this once. Too many second chances. And every second chance becomes a pattern. You think you're being kind to yourself. You're actually being weak. Real self-respect is strict. It demands more. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't comfort you when you fall short. Corrects you. Immediately. Without emotion. That's how you grow. Not by feeling better, but by becoming better. And becoming better requires something you've been avoiding. Sacrifice. You want results? Something has to go. Your comfort. Your distractions. Your bad habits. Your excuses. You can't keep everything and expect change. Because the longer you wait, the weaker your decision becomes. You've felt this before. That moment of clarity. That surge of, this time is different. And then, you did nothing. Or worse, you started, then stopped. Again, that pattern is your enemy. Not the world. Not your situation. Your pattern. And patterns don't break with intention. They break with interruption. Immediate interruption. You don't think your way out. You act your way out. Right now, your brain is already negotiating. Telling you to start later. To plan it properly. To ease into it. That voice? That's weakness trying to survive. And it's intelligent. It sounds reasonable, logical, safe, but it's lying. Because safety has kept you stuck. Comfort has kept you average. And average is where potential goes to die. You were not built for average, but you've been living like it, quietly accepting less than you're capable of. Not because you lack ability, but because you lack enforcement. You don't enforce your own standards. You let things slide. You let yourself off the hook. You give chances where consequences should exist. That's the gap between who you are and who you could be. And that gap is filled with undisciplined decisions. Thousands of them, small, insignificant on their own. But together, they define your life. So don't look for one big change. Look at your next decision, because that's where everything shifts. You either follow through, or you don't. You either act, or you delay. You either reinforce discipline, or you strengthen weakness. There is no neutral ground. Every decision votes. Every action counts. And right now, your votes have been inconsistent. That's why your identity feels unstable. One day you're focused. Next day, distracted. One day you're disciplined. Next day, careless. That inconsistency creates internal conflict. You don't know who you are, because you haven't decided. Not fully. Not permanently. You're still experimenting with discipline instead of committing to it. That ends here. You don't try to be consistent. You become consistent. There is no option to fail. Only correction. Immediate correction. You slip, you fix it instantly. No emotional reaction. No guilt. No overthinking. Just correction. That's how disciplined people operate. They don't waste time feeling bad. They fix the behavior fast. You waste time in emotion, regret, frustration, self-talk. All of it is useless if it doesn't lead to action. And most of the time, it doesn't. It just drains you, keeps you stuck in your head. While your life stays the same, you don't need to feel different. You need to act different. That's it. Simple, direct, uncomfortable, but effective. And effectiveness is what you've been missing. You've been busy, but not effective. You've been active, but not consistent. You've been thinking, but not executing. And execution is everything. Without it, nothing moves, nothing grows, nothing changes. So strip it down. Right now, what is one thing you know you should be doing? Not 10 things. 1. The thing you keep avoiding. The thing that creates resistance. That's your target. That's your test. That's your opportunity. And your response to it defines you, not your intentions, not your plans. Your response. So what are you going to do? Delay again or act? Because this moment is not small. Feels small, but it's not. This is where identity shifts. Quietly, internally. No one sees it. No one applauds it. But it changes everything. You either become someone who acts or someone who avoids. And once that identity locks in, your future follows it. Automatically. You don't rise above identity. You live inside it. So choose carefully, because you're choosing more than an action. You're choosing who you are. And once you decide, you must reinforce it. Daily. Relentlessly. Without exception. Because identity is not built once. It's built continuously. Every single day. Through repetition. Through consistency. Through discipline. And discipline is not something you do occasionally. It's something you become. It shows in everything. How you wake up. How you work. How you respond. How you think. It's everywhere. Or it's nowhere. There is no part-time discipline. Only full commitment. Or none at all. You've been part-time. That's why results are inconsistent. That's why progress feels slow. That's why confidence is unstable. Because you're not fully in. You're half committed, half disciplined, half focused, and half never wins. Half never transforms. Half stays stuck. So stop being half. Decide. Fully. Completely. Aggressively. No fallback plan. No escape route. No, if it doesn't work. It works. If you work. Consistently. Relentlessly. Without stopping. That's the requirement. That's the standard. And if that sounds intense, it should. Because transformation is intense. Change is uncomfortable. Growth is painful. But staying the same, that's worse. That slow frustration. That quiet disappointment. That feeling of knowing you could be more, but aren't. That eats at you, daily, silently, until one day, you either break or you change. So which one is it? Because both require pain. One leads to growth. The other leads to regret. And regret is heavier, longer, permanent. You don't want that. You've already felt enough of it. Small regrets, missed opportunities, broken promises, Now imagine that multiplied over years. That's your future if nothing changes. So change it now, not later. Now, interrupt the pattern. Break the cycle. Do something different. Immediately. Not perfect. Different. Better. Stronger. More disciplined. And then repeat it. Again. And again. And again. Until it becomes automatic. Until it becomes you. Because that's the goal. Not temporary motivation. Permanent identity. Where consistency is not effort. It's default. Where discipline is not forced. It's natural. Where action is not difficult. It's expected. From yourself. By yourself. That's self-respect. Not words. Not affirmations. Behavior. Repeated behavior. Aligned with your standards. That's what builds power. Real power. The kind people feel. The kind that doesn't need to speak loudly. The kind that doesn't seek attention. Because it doesn't need it. It knows its value. And that confidence, it's earned. Through consistency. Through discipline. Through action. Daily. Relentless action. So stop waiting. Stop thinking. Stop hesitating. And move. Again. And again. And again. Until stopping feels wrong. Until discipline feels normal. Until consistency becomes your identity. Because at that point, you're no longer chasing results. You're producing them. Naturally. Inevitably. Because that's what disciplined people do. They don't hope. They execute. They don't wish. They act. They don't talk. They prove. So prove it. Not to others. To yourself. Because that's the only proof that matters. And once you have that, no one can take it from you. No circumstance can break it. No obstacle can stop it. Because it's internal. Built. Solid. Unshakable. That's who you're becoming. If you choose it. If you commit. If you act. Right now. Not later. Now. So don't close this and go back to old patterns. Don't let this be another moment of awareness. That leads to nothing. Use it. Act on it. Immediately. Because this moment is your turning point. If you decide it is, so decide. And then prove it. Through action. Consistent. Relentless. Unstoppable action. Starting now. Move. Until it becomes permanent. Because one action changes nothing. Repeated action changes everything. That's the difference you keep ignoring. You want transformation in a moment. But transformation is built in cycles. Daily cycles. Relentless cycles. And every cycle you complete, you become harder, stronger, sharper, more controlled. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself not to feel better, but to stay aligned with discipline. He reminded himself that the mind must obey, not wander. You don't remind yourself. You drift. That's why you lose control. Control is not a feeling. It's a practice. A repeated act of choosing discipline over comfort. And right now, comfort still owns you. You reach for your phone. You delay your work. You entertain distractions. Not because you need them, but because you're conditioned. That conditioning is your chain. Invisible, but powerful. And breaking it requires something most people avoid. Conscious suffering. Choosing the harder path. Repeatedly. Without applause. Without recognition. Without immediate reward. Seneca warned that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Yet you still hesitate. You build scenarios in your head. You create fear where none exists, and that fear delays action. But once you act, you realize something. It wasn't that hard. It never was. You just made it heavy. In your mind. That's the trap. Thinking replaces doing. And every time that happens, you lose momentum. Momentum is fragile. Hard to build. Easy to destroy. One missed action becomes two. Two becomes a pattern. And the pattern becomes your identity. So protect momentum. Like it's everything. Because it is. Once you start moving consistently, everything aligns. Your focus sharpens. Your energy stabilizes. Your confidence builds. Not because life got easier, but because you became stronger. That's the shift. You don't wait for conditions to improve. You improve yourself until conditions don't matter. That's power. Epictetus taught that you cannot control external events, only your response. Yet you keep trying to control outcomes instead of mastering your actions. You worry about results. You think about recognition. You focus on what might happen. And in doing that, you lose control of what matters. The present action, the next move, the only thing that actually changes anything. Everything else is noise. And noise destroys discipline because it divides your attention, pulls you in different directions, weakens your focus, and scattered focus produces scattered results. You don't need more effort. You need more precision, directed action, focused repetition, clear intention, executed daily, without deviation. That's how you build consistency, not by doing more, but by doing what matters, without fail. And failure? You misunderstand it. You think failure is falling short, missing a day, breaking a streak. But real failure is not correcting, is not returning, is not continuing. That's failure, because falling is part of the process. Staying down is a decision. So stop dramatizing mistakes. Stop turning small slips into full collapses. You missed once? Correct it. Immediately. No emotion. No story. No delay. That's discipline. Clean. Direct. Effective. You don't attach identity to failure. You attach identity to correction. That's how you stay consistent. Because consistency is not perfection. It's persistence. Relentless persistence. Through discomfort. Through boredom. Through resistance. And boredom, that's another enemy you underestimate. You need excitement to act. That's a problem. Because real progress is boring. Repetition is boring. Structure is boring. But boring builds mastery. And mastery builds power. So if you can't handle boredom, you will never reach depth. You will stay shallow, jumping from one thing to another, chasing stimulation, avoiding discipline. That's the cycle most people live in. And that's why most people stay average. Because they can't stay still long enough to build something meaningful. But you're different now. Because you see it, you feel it, that shift, that awareness. And now, you have a choice. Return to old patterns, or step into discipline, fully. No hesitation, no negotiation, just action. Because every second you delay, you strengthen the old version of yourself and weaken the new one. So decide, who wins, the disciplined version or the distracted one? Because both exist inside you, and both are fighting for control. Every moment, every decision, every action, and the one that wins is the one you feed. So feed discipline, starve distraction, feed action, starve hesitation, feed consistency, starve excuses. That's the formula. Simple, but brutal, because it requires constant awareness, constant correction, constant effort. But that effort becomes easier over time, not because the work changes, but because you change. You become more focused, more controlled, more disciplined, and what once felt hard becomes normal. That's adaptation. That's growth. That's transformation. And once you reach that point, there is no going back, because you've seen what you're capable of. You've felt what discipline creates. You've experienced control, real control. And once you taste that, average becomes unbearable. You can't go back to inconsistency. You can't tolerate weakness. You can't accept excuses, because now you know better, and knowing better creates responsibility. Responsibility to act, to maintain, to continue, without stopping, because stopping is regression, and regression is unacceptable. Not anymore, not after everything you've seen, everything you've felt, everything you've realized. This is your new standard. This is your new identity, built on discipline, driven by consistency, maintained through action, every single day, no exceptions. So the next time you feel resistance, good, that means you're on the edge of growth. the edge of transformation, the edge of becoming someone you've never been before. And that edge, that's where you stay. Not comfortable, not relaxed, but focused, controlled, disciplined, because that's who you are now. Not someone who waits, not someone who hesitates, not someone who negotiates, someone who acts immediately, consistently, relentlessly. So act. Again, this is where most people stop. They feel something, then they go back to who they were. Don't do that. Don't let this be another moment that fades. Because the truth is, your life will not change from what you just heard. It will change from what you do next. Right now, not later, not when it's convenient. Now, this is the line. On one side, the version of you that keeps repeating the same cycle. On the other, the one who executes without excuses. You don't drift into that version. You decide, and then you prove it. Quietly, consistently, relentlessly. So if something in you just shifted, don't ignore it. Lock it in. Move with it. And if you're serious about becoming someone who follows through, subscribe. Not for motivation, for alignment, for standards, for a reminder of who you're choosing to be. And don't stop here. There's a video on your screen right now. That's not just content. That's your next step. Click it, watch it, apply it, then come back stronger. Comment if you're done negotiating with weakness. Like it if you felt exposed. Share it with someone who keeps making excuses. Because real change doesn't stay silent. It spreads. Now go prove it. Not tomorrow. Now.